Hush ye, little pet ye. Hush ye, do not fret ye. The Black Douglas shall not get ye.
I'm in the lands of South Lanarkshire. More specifically, I'm on the trail of one of the greatest warriors that would go down in Scottish history. A loyal sidekick of King Robert the Bruce. The good to the people who knew him well. The black to people he was a nightmare for. I want to delve deep and find out who the personality and the character is behind the Black Douglas. I'm in the lands of James Douglas, of his predecessor and father, William Douglas. And we're going to investigate today his birthplace in these lands that he knew so well. In Gaelic, in Scots Gaelic, this is known as glas or glas, the black water. And you can see that when you peer into the murky depths of this water, that it really is quite difficult to see through. The Douglases would have known this well. James would have played here as a young boy, a stone's throw from Douglas Castle. The lands belonging to William Douglas before that are traced back to another William Douglas. And these lands, which would be famously Douglas lands, are beautiful. And the Douglas water here, the black water, which goes all the way from here to the River Clyde, just on the outskirts of Lanark. We need to understand what it would be like to be brought up here. Families who have held this land for generations. They've lived here. They've died here. They've lived, loved, and lost together. For a young man who stands to inherit this land, it's sometimes difficult to comprehend when that land is taken from you. And it's not given to another family member. It's not given to some distant cousin. But it's given to another person from another land. An invader. That must have boiled the blood of the young James Douglas to have your inheritance forfeit because a more superior and powerful imperial ruler says so. The local village of Douglas, its name comes from the water, pronounced Douglas. I really want to dig deep and find out as much as I can. I've heard the name the Black Douglas, James Douglas, since I was a boy, since childhood. But in order to get really deep into the meat and gravy and find out who the man was, I think we need to look at his father. It's easy to conjure up in your mind images of the young James riding on horseback for the first time out here with his father on the bounds of their castle lands. James's father was William Douglas. His mother was Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth died in 1288. So we know that James was born before then. We can't exactly pin precisely when he was born. Any research into William Douglas will reveal a colourful character, to say the least. William Douglas was governor of the town of Berwick Castle. And what he saw at the beginning of the Scottish Wars of Independence was absolutely horrific. Now, he was there when King Edward I came north and did the blackest thing in Scottish history when he sacked Berwick and killed the vast majority of its inhabitants. William Douglas was taken prisoner. And while Edward's men were laying siege to Dunbar, a Scots army appeared. That day was terrible because the Scots would be absolutely annihilated. They were taunting the English from the castle walls in Dunbar when the Scots appeared. Traditional rumours to humiliate the English were that because they had dishonoured the holy man, that God had damned them to have tails, and they taunted them from the castle walls that they would cut their tails off. But it wasn't to be. After the defeat at Dunbar, William Douglas would be paraded through Scotland with Edward's company. Now, at some point, Edward goes south again. And when things flare up under William Wallace in 1297, William Douglas joins him on a raid in Scone. Time passes. Robert the Bruce was in English camp at the time. He was Edward's man. But he was told to perform a raid here on Douglas Castle. And he did that. He came. He took the people that were here including the young boy James Douglas. And he led them to safety. William Douglas was known as William le Hardi, and by all accounts, he was a colourful character, not an easy man to get on with. He was reckless, he was wild, and he was unpredictable. There were complaints frequently from the Tower of London that Douglas was a very aggressive man. A man that was hard to handle. And I wonder if the young James inherited some of those genetic traits. Just a short distance up from the Douglas water, we have what remains of Douglas Castle. Now, this building that you see here, this marvellous tower, has been some years since I've been here. I absolutely love this place, but all of this area here, all of this mound, you can see the locks over there, and we have walked along the Douglas water and up this path here onto this mound. This was where the Castle of Douglas was. I was away to say Castle Douglas, that's something entirely different. But this was the castle of William Douglas. This tower here is from a much later period. If you go to the Douglas Museum in the town, in the village, you can see when this mansion here was in full before it was destroyed. But this is all that remains. But where you're walking now, you're on the earthen ramparts of Douglas Castle. And it's quite a height that you get up here. And these beautiful lands, they are really beautiful. They must have rode along the Blackwater there to Lanark many times in their life. They'd have hunted and fished here. But this old tower is still quite remarkable. Look at that. Beautiful. And it's good that we do have something, even although it's not from the time of young James Douglas and William Douglas, that we have something identifiable here on the castle grounds. And as always, I can't help myself. It's been many a year, my friend. You can make a friend from stone. Somehow, it does connect me with the past. So as you walk out now, and you look over the castle grounds, way where that person's walking their dogs, taking that path away up there towards the Church of St. Bride's, which we'll go and visit, which many people will be familiar with in the Douglas story, particularly later in Douglas's life, the young James, on account of the Douglas larder. But that will come in the series of films that I'm going to produce on this remarkable young man who has such a strong place in our history. This castle is certainly on some height, and to give you an idea, if you just look at the livestock below, it's quite a prominent standing here. And the views that they must have had, the times that they must have had here, and loved these lands so dearly, even although medieval Scotland could be a powder keg. Obviously part of the old building here. I do wonder what the old Douglas castle it would have looked like. I can imagine it would have quite a crude appearance, quite a foreboding appearance. Something like the castle of Hermitage springs to mind, just taking in the nature of the Douglases. One amusing story, although it wasn't amusing for the women concerned, is that after James's mother Elizabeth died, William Douglas would abduct an English noblewoman who was visiting up here, and he would force her to marry him. And when King Edward got to hear of this, of course he was incensed. That got his attention. But it gives us a clue as to the man William Douglas, a man who I see as quite a warrior, a law unto himself, a man that you did not want to mess around with. And I think that he would have been a dominant force in the upbringing of the young James Douglas. And here we get a very good idea of the ramparts here. It must have been some castle, quite large, because the ground area up there is large. Perhaps it had outer walls and an inner castle. But one thing's for sure, that the name Douglas or Douglas in this area, they ruled. Douglas country. At some point in 1297, likely that year, James Douglas, the young man, is taken to Paris. Now Paris, back then, would have been one heck of an education for a young man like James. It had a population of around 200,000 people. It was ruled by King Philip the Fair, and he had issues with England. The war over Aquitaine and other territories. The marvellous architecture that young James would have seen. The Cathedral of Notre Dame, Sainte-Chapelle, the Louvre Valley. It's said that young James spent his time in ribald, rowdy and offensive company. Now that gives a little hint to the character and personality of his dad. Young James would spend 3 years in Paris getting his social education. What an education that must have been, with the company that he hung around with in the back streets, in the alehouses, even although he was a young guy at the time. From time to time, news from here in Scotland would filter through to him. Some of those snippets of news would have been crushing for him. For example, when he learned that his father William was taken prisoner and led south to the Tower of London. His lands, his castle, his inheritance was forfeit. Not only was it forfeit, he would learn that it would be given by the king to one Robert Clifford, one of Edward I's military commanders who would play a prominent role for the English in the Scottish Wars of Independence. That must have left James seething and fuming. And then later news that through mysterious circumstances and with no real explanation, William Douglas had died while in captivity. The more I think about it, I can't get it out of my mind how it must have bothered James that his lands had been taken away from him. Everything he owned was taken from him. And I'm just thinking how I might have felt myself, you know, especially when you have a rich area as this. That in fact would be one of the main driving forces, perfectly understandable. When James was to return to Scotland, that would be his mission in life, would be to come back and reclaim what the English had taken from him. During that rowdy company that James kept while he was in Paris, it's more than likely there that, along with other types of education, that he was taught how to use a sword, to use a dagger, a dirk, a shield, a bow even. And I'm sure that those skills in his mind would be put to very good use in his quest to put the name of Douglas back here on the lands of his forefathers. Now this is St Bride's Chapel in Douglas, and this was a place of worship for William Douglas and the young James. Look at this old doorway. Oh, it's old. And this would infamously play a part in one of the later escapades, a violent escapade, a very violent incident in the life of young James Douglas, when he indeed became the Black Douglas to his enemies. But his father would have known this place. He would have known this place as a boy. His mother Elizabeth would have known this place. And this is part of the ancient medieval church. Of that time. It's beautiful. You can see some of the old brickwork here that would have come into some of the other buildings within the church. Even some of these old cloister areas here. Absolutely beautiful. The stories that are buried in stone. innocent brides. And it's very tempting for me to go into the incident about the Douglas larder when the English here came to visit. And James Douglas and his men, under disguise, would join them. But I'm going to refrain because that's in a later episode. But I've also come here because it's fitting that just as young James saw his beginnings here, that his end was here also. So for anyone here who is a Douglas, or has Douglas heritage, this is an absolute must visit. It really is. And for its age, and for the ages since medieval times, it's in remarkably good condition and it's well looked after. This is Lady Elizabeth of Douglas. A remarkable effigy. In rest. These marvellous old Douglas banners here. And some of the pieces of the old medieval church. This is Marjorie Abernethy, who married Hugh Douglas, younger of Douglas, uncle of the good Sir James in 1259.
This here is James, the 7th Earl of Douglas, and his wife. What a place, and what a place to come and see if you're a Douglas. You really are in a special place that goes right back to your ancestorship. Here in South Lanarkshire, Scotland. This here is Archibald Douglas, the 5th Earl, who died in the year 1438. And finally, we come to the place where young Sir James Douglas, the Black Douglas or the good Sir James, lies in rest. Quite phenomenal to be standing over the bones of this man. And this heart here, I know, through my friends, that this is one of the Bruce hearts from the Bruce oak, placed here by Strathleven artisans. Such a nice touch. But this is James Douglas. After his life ended in Teba, Spain, and his bones were boiled, they were brought here and interred here. This, at the foot of Lady Elizabeth, is reputedly the heart of Sir James Douglas, interred in here. It's always quite a surreal experience, even to stand in here, in this company. When you go to Dunfermline and you stand over the grave of King Robert the Bruce, or any other kings and queens of Scotland, or anywhere, this rivals that, and it even holds a much more mysterious aura about the whole thing. And that's how powerful a man James Douglas was. What he did in life for himself, for Scotland under King Robert the Bruce, and even in his loyalty after the death of Bruce, shows a life that is nothing short of remarkable. In fact, it's unrivaled. And I look forward, just as we begin here at his end, it's only right to include this place, but just to give you an insight, I want to take you on a journey of the life that this man led. We've explored the castle, Douglas Castle, the castle that Sir Walter Scott, our Scottish bard, would later refer to as Castle Dangerous. Well, James saw to it that it certainly lived up to that name when it was occupied by the English. But James went on a roller coaster life, and I want to follow that trail. I want to dig up some facts, myth, and legend and blend them all together and come back here for the final time for the final episode in this series, so that you have a real insight into the man whose remains lie in this tomb.
Thank you for walking in the footsteps of James Douglas with me. This is the first in a series to uncover the character and the personality behind the man. Join me next time as we explore his return to Scotland, his reconciliation with King Robert the Bruce, and his path to realise his mission in life. Thank you for your support. Please subscribe to the channel if you already haven't done so. Comment, share. I would love to hear your thoughts. Help the channel grow and help create more awareness and preserve our history.